Good morning, good morning. Hopefully you can all hear me in the room. Firstly, thank you ever so much for being here. Thank you for those of you who are re-attending. Welcome to everybody who hasn't come before, and just delighted to have you all here. So if you don't know me, I'm Andrew Deverell-Smith. I will try and speak as little as possible. And I hope you will help me in a sense of questions and debate and all those good things. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We have a room downstairs as well with lots of people, so they're most welcome, and thank you for being here. Now, questions, please ask downstairs. We have Laura and Amy in the room with mics, so they can ask your questions for you. And then we'll welcome our amazing panel up to the stage. They insisted on standing in the corner like naughty school children because they really wanted to see Rob's slides and presentation. So I don't think I have any more to say than that, other than please enjoy. Thank you for your time. I'll try and keep us bang on time. We'll be leaving in 1 hour. So let's get started. Can I ask the panel from my left, Penny, to introduce themselves and explain what they do in the sector?
Hi everyone, my name is Penny Cameron. I am Head of Development in the UK for the mouthful that is Unibail-Rodamco-Westfield. We are a global developer, owner and operator of mixed-use assets. Probably most of you are familiar with our two flagship assets in London, Westfield Stratford and Westfield London, and the developments around that, which include everything from offices to residential, BTR, and now hopefully some student housing in Stratford.
Dominic Grace. I pulled a 37-year shift at Savills, where I helped to build their very strong resi development team in London. I left 3 years ago, and I've now got my own advisory business.
Hi there, I'm Alex Notay. I wear a number of hats, but I've worked for 20 years around resi investment, placemaking and regeneration, and ESG. The mouthful that you can see there is the Radix Big Tent Housing Commission, which is a government commission that was chaired by Dame Kate Barker, who's a friend and former colleague of Rob at the Bank of England, who is now chairing the New Towns Task Force. So I have stepped up to chair that through, and we'll be making a government report at the end of October on things around the housing crisis.
Morning, everybody. I'm Andrew Saunderson, and I head up the residential capital markets team at CBRE. Three main parts to what we do. We do everything that is build to rent, be that multifamily, single family, PBSA, and our affordable housing team sit with me as well.
Brilliant. So, guys, thanks for being here. And I'm going to jump in with a first question, but once again, please ask questions. Laura is very eagle-eyed. Amy, I think, is on the other side of the room. So if you have a question to ask, they'll bring the mic to you. The first question was supplied to us, and it is political, believe it or not. We've got the first Labour government for 14 years. We have the first Labour budget a couple of weeks away, I think. Are you excited or concerned about what they'll come up with? Penny?
I'm a developer, so I'm an eternal optimist. So I would say I am cautiously excited, although I did spend the beginning of the week at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, and possibly that excitement has been slightly dampened. So from the sort of lack of any real commitments, but we live in hope for the budget, I'd say.
Well, I pick quick pop quiz, if I may. Now, let's put our audience to test here. This is from the second verse of a very well-known song, and full marks to anyone who gets this right. It goes as follows. And I can't see the wood for the trees, you set 'em alight, burn the bridges as you've gone, I'm too weak to fight ya, I've got my personal hell to deal with. Anyone?
Is it Taylor Swift, Don?
Anyone? Anyone know? You'll know this song. It's very relevant because it's the second verse of D. Ream's "Things Can Only Get Better." Who knew? So look, from a PR point of view, we all know it's been utterly rubbish. The first 2 days of the 100 days, I was feeling quite good, and since then it's been buckets of cold water. So what do I hope about the budget? That I hope things do get better for the government and the messaging they're giving to us. please.
Well, I think we're all with you on that front, Dom. Alex, what do you see?
I think has to be an element of realism for our sector. So, if you're looking at the £22 billion black hole, or whichever estimates you're taking from the OBR, we have to be realistic that in the UK, housing and development and real estate are at best fifth on the list. It's always a campaigning issue in an election, but actually when you've got defence, education, social care, NHS, then we are not in there. There is not going to be huge slugs of new money coming in to unlock all the challenges that we've got in the sector. Equally, they're getting terribly excitable around planning reform, and that's all great. There's some changes that need to happen there. But I think recognising the underlying challenges to viability beyond planning is something that we're trying to get to be understood. So I think I wouldn't expect any major carrots to be dangled in the budget, but I would hope that some realism around some of the complexities of regulation that could be loosened up a bit and enable business to flow and enable institutional investment to catalyse stuff where the government can't fund it. I would be hopeful that there might be some regulatory improvements that won't be sexy and exciting budget announcements, but might come around it.
Thank you.
I think I sort of just follow on from what Dom said, really. I think we've all heard enough now of all the terrible things that they've inherited. It's now the time that they start looking forward and start trying to build confidence. That's ultimately the thing that has been missing over the last 2 years. Yes, we've had much higher interest rates, etc., but ultimately what we need to see is confidence in the economy. People need to feel as though things are moving in the right direction. And so long as you've got your Prime Minister, your Chancellor saying we've just inherited a terrible situation, which frankly I don't think they have, as it happens, people are going to feel miserable. People are going to be reluctant to spend money. People are going to be reluctant to do things. So I do hope this is the time when that pendulum swings the other way and Keir Starmer comes out onto the front foot, or Rachel Reeves rather comes out onto the front foot and says, actually, we are going to do some good things and we should feel confident about our future.
On the same theme, what's the one good thing they could do for each of you in the lanes that you operate?
Hope. No, joking aside, sentiment. We all know how important that is. Such a basic thing to say. But my goodness, the time they're wasting now, effectively a whole quarter would have gone. Budget at the end of October. Guess what? It's almost Christmas.
Yep.
And certainly in the development sector, people just literally have downed tools. And we need it to be rebooted. Contractors are going bust, some big ones we know. Lots of small contractors are going bust left, right and centre. This government needs to give our sector, indeed the whole economy, some good news and some hope that it's worth coming out to play. Because Penny and I were talking about earlier, right now as a developer, the clever thing to do is absolutely bugger all right now. And that's not good.
And I think the three is certainty, consistency, clarity. So when you're setting targets, whether it's around EPC targets and the movable goalposts of that, it doesn't allow you to plan in any way on an existing portfolio. So actually you're safer just to sit in your hands and do nothing, whether it's around a new investment or a retrofit or anything else. So I think just being able to give that solid base of we're not going to move the goalposts and change things every 5 minutes would really help catalyse some new investment.
And I think also an acknowledgement of the sort of the difficulty of house building. I mean, there is this great ambition for 1.5 million homes in the next 5 years. And it's almost as though, well, the key to unlocking that, we'll just make planning a little bit easier, and happy days. There'll be another, in 5 years' time, we'll have 1.5 million homes. Well, point number one, making planning easier now is not going to deliver you homes in the next 5 years. That's going to deliver you homes in 10, 15 years, because the stock that's being delivered or sold at the moment was actually consented back in 2019. And point number two, there's a huge number of consented schemes out there that are simply not viable. And we have to figure out how we unlock Building Safety Act and viability to be able to actually start moving stock forward in the quantum that they're looking for.
Can I put something into context as well? Sorry, Andrew. The £22 billion, awful confession, I shouted at the radio on Monday morning when Nick Robinson on Today asked Rachel Reeves, first question, very good open question that was a nice, easy, full toss outside the leg stump. She could have smashed it over the boundary with some good news. She immediately said, oh, we inherited this £22 billion black hole. Now, at the risk of, Rob, an expert, put it into context, I actually looked this up. Well, in fact, I was prompted by this. In August, you may have seen this government borrowed 13.7 billion just in August, okay? And the £22 billion is spent in 6 weeks in the NHS. Put it into context. And as a government, annually, we spend, I'll look at Rob to make sure I've got this right, 1.2 trillion. Now, only someone like Andrew, with his sort of earnings, would know what that means. It's actually 1,200 billion. So please shut up about this 22 billion, please.
Yeah, and for me, I completely agree with Dom. In the grand scheme of things, it's pretty de minimis, although it does sound like a big number. I think for me, it's just an understanding and an acceptance of how complicated the environment around development is, with all the implications of the Building Safety Act, the delays that is going to lead to, the issues that we have in our planning system, the delays. It's over, I think, from a chart that I've seen recently, it's over 1,000 days now from from buying a piece of land to even beginning to think about getting on site, and that's not even a big scheme. So it is that understanding, and then when you overlay the Renters Reform Bill, if they have a serious aspiration to deliver this 1.5 million homes, which is 300,000 homes a year, they are going to have to try to make the environment in which developers operate, investors operate, more simple, because otherwise people will go and do other things.
Mm-hmm. Rob?
I'm not able to.
So, you're saying, Penny, 5 years from acquisition to delivery?
If you're looking to deliver scales of significant, schemes of significant, I can't even say it, significant scale, yes.
We've sort of blown the second question, which was supplied, which is how confident are you of 300,000 homes being delivered over the next 5 years? So, what do we do to supercharge the delivery of projects?
There's got to be some really basic unblocking of simple things in the sector that currently don't work. So any developer trying to deliver 106s, you'll have all seen the kind of inside housing statements on how many registered providers have either stopped their development programme or are no longer requiring anything else. Until they get a rent settlement and some kind of ability to cover their own interest, which is the challenge, then that entire sector can't take whatever is coming out of the main development sector. So, and we need those homes, we need shared ownership and social rent and affordable housing. So there's got to be a bit of support for that bit of the sector to be able to acquire 106s once more and unblock the stuff that is being delivered because it's just sitting there. And then a more coherent way of allowing the for-profit RP sector, which has had a really clunky start, but I think has shown that it could sit workably alongside registered providers and actually deliver additionality, lots more funded in a different way without the requirement for grant in the same way, and actually enable that to catalyse a lot more activity in that side of the sector. And I think recognising the need of mixed tenures, we are still having to make again and again the case for build to rent, the case for a mix on a larger scheme that will allow the kind of placemaking, all those elements, but actually different price points. And we're still getting bogged down in whichever government's obsession with ownership, which is fine and is important, but we have to be realistic that an awful lot of people in the country either can't own yet or may not ever own, but they still deserve a quality home. And we have this cultural idea that renting is somehow a second-class tenure. And if we can't get rid of that in the kind of policy framework, then actually you can't deliver housing at scale. And what we need is delivering lots of all tenures, housing for older people, housing for students, all that blend, and actually treat it equally. At the moment, in terms of viability, the hours and hours, well, you probably have to do more of it than I do nowadays, but that you waste trying to justify a build-to-rent scheme alongside sales viability and everything else is incoherent. It is all housing. And actually the other bit I would say is housing is infrastructure. It is infrastructure for economic growth and prosperity. That is the most important thing we should be delivering, and getting our government to understand that good quality, sustainable homes of whatever tenure, but all tenures will drive all the other things they're trying to get in the economy, and they should be supporting it. That would be a really fundamental shift that would get them a bit closer to 300 a year.
I think that infrastructure point is a really key one, and that acknowledgement that it is that the importance of housing, that it almost isn't. There seems to be a view that developers delivering housing are making loads of profit, and therefore you need to be able to squeeze as much out of them as possible. But actually, the biggest benefit that they're going to deliver is the homes, and so that acknowledgement. And then I would sort of go a step further, and I'm probably being very hopeful, but I think the recognition of the financial investment that you need to make when you're delivering any sort of residential development, but most of them now are of scale in that infrastructure in the ground. So we don't have enough power. There are all sorts of very boring utility things that my team sort of constantly telling me about that have huge numbers attached to them that all have to come in up front. And there are a lot of schemes that just can't get off the ground because of that kind of investment. So,
do you want a boring pop quiz, Nick? The last time we built a reservoir in the UK? 36 years ago. Yeah. Wow. And actually, if you think of the population growth, the kind of any new town, and so anyone who's tried to do development in Cambridgeshire will be finding that they can't get any water because there is no capacity. So we need reservoirs, we need utilities. So West London, there's no capacity in the grid for any kind of consent for the next 10 years. So that infrastructure has just been kicked down the road because there are no votes in it, and it's not glamorous and exciting. And the NIMBY side of things, we need to do a better job educating people that infrastructure needs investment and it needs to be delivered. And some people will live near pylons and some people will live near reservoirs, but it will also, they can live in nice, well-designed places. So we have to get better at funding that.
Problem is, it all absolutely can't not agree with everything. Trouble is, it all costs money and takes time. Mm-hmm. So on the basis there ain't a lot of money, as we keep being told, what could a government do? And do you know what? We haven't talked about planning yet. Great that they're looking to tackle that. But if you regard the development process as a machine or an engine, let's say, just plonking a bit of oil on the planning bit of that engine, which a lot of people might say is a redundant, 19th century engine, yep. It ain't going to fix it. So every stage needs some oil being put on it. Some of that oil is money, but wisely spent, please. And one thing that the government could do that we sort of all own is bring forward land that government owns. Things like, I've always been a bit of a scratch record on this, for London, the London Land Commission, instigated by Boris at the end of his tenure as mayor, which was a sort of doomsday book review of all the sites owned by TfL, NHS Trust, police stations, fire, etc. Great idea, with a view to maybe doing a bit of CPO around those sites and bring forward that thing. Sadiq Khan kicked that into the long grass. Madness. Things like that need to happen now. So you bring forward the land at zero cost and bring it forward, let's say, an outline consent, then bring in developers. You've de-risked it, and it hasn't cost anyone any money yet, really. Please.
And on the good governance of what was the phrase, Rob?
Sound finance.
Sound finance. Andrew's the finance capital market.
Very sound as well.
Now that you've pulled that face, you're definitely the finance guy.
Correct, thanks.
But what's the appetite from private capital to supercharge?
Well, I think increasingly we're at an inflection point. The last 10 years have been nothing short of extraordinary. And the fact that we're all sitting here today, I think we could almost be giving ourselves a bit of a pat on the back. If you think back, had we been here this time 10 years ago, we'd have said, everything's fine. We've been through the GFC, we've got through that, everything feels really good. And since then, it's been nothing short of a pretty unpleasant roller coaster ride. We've had Brexit, we've had COVID, we've had war in Ukraine, we've had super high levels of inflation, we've got ongoing issues in the Middle East, we've had 6 prime ministers in 10 years. So we've been through this period of unbelievable turbulence. And I actually now think, when you look at it, there is still an ongoing war in Ukraine, there is still ongoing issues in the Middle East, but we are now getting to the point where inflation is coming down, it's just hovering slightly over the Bank of England target level. Slightly disappointing, and I did mention this earlier, that as someone said to me last night, the Bank of England didn't do what they're supposed to do, which was follow the US. Last week the US cut rates by 50 basis points. What we should have done, according to this person, it wasn't me, is cut rates by 25 bips. But it will come. So we are now in that environment where things are getting better. And I do think that the government have a big part to play in this. If they are going to deliver this housing that they're talking about, the housing associations, for the reasons that Alex has said, are not the answer. They have got huge issues that they're battling with. You know, they've got huge issues still around fire remediation in a post-Grenfell environment. They've got huge issues with decent home standards, with all the mould, etc. And then the biggest issue that no one is even beginning to talk about within that sector is how on earth do they get to net zero? So I don't think the housing associations are going to be the answer. The answer is private capital. And the answer is the pension funds, the institutions investing in it to get what they ultimately want, which is long-term, stable income returns. And that's what the government should really be focused on. How do they create an environment whereby those institutions want to invest in the sector and want to deliver homes, be it affordable homes or build-to-rent homes? That is, for me, their biggest challenge, really.
And I think also it's easy to sort of sit and get quite doom and gloom about the whole, where we may end up. But I think we could easily talk ourselves into a far worse situation. So I think now is the time that we need to have a little bit of positivity. And when you look at the supply constraints in the market at the moment, the housing supply is at its lowest for decades. Yet there is still phenomenal demand, and we as a nation are getting our heads around the sort of private rented sector and that model. So there is an awful lot of good news, and I said I'm an eternal optimist, but I think there is a lot, and we just have to be quite careful at the moment that we don't talk ourselves into an even worse position.
I think that's really important, because the point that Andrew's made about pension funds, the good thing is it's already happening. So, and it has been for quite some time. So the local government pension funds have been really quite proactive in investing into kind of affordable housing funds. So the one that we used to run in Scotland has it's that intuitive thing where Strathclyde invest in it because we are literally housing their customers. It's a very kind of long-term liability match in the best possible way. You've seen the announcement about Nest and going into with L&G their build-to-rent fund, and that's really, really encouraging. And a lot of the LGPS funds are starting to pool together, so to be much more proactive. So you're getting to the ticket sizes that make it viable. So they'll still be in a kind of 5% allocation to real estate, which is tiny. And so when they'll be arguing for kind of 10, 15 mil, but actually when they're pooling together and they can start to invest, 50s to 100, that starts to get more exciting for an institutional partner that goes, oh, okay, actually, in that case, we can come to North Wales and deliver some housing for you in a place that otherwise we would not have looked at. So I think it is already happening. Exactly as Andrew said, what government needs to do is pick up on that and make it easier, make it that environment that is stable and coherent and doesn't come up with random regulatory changes that show how little they understand the sector, like selective licensing or multiple dwelling relief, that absolutely decimate what you need to do on an operational side to make it viable.
I'm going to move it on, but I think we're still on the theme of politics, I'm afraid. But I'm going to move it to the US election, which is...
Oh, I want to know what song Dominic's going to sing now.
I'm not sure who knows in the audience, but I now live in the Middle East, and it's talked about every day. So what are your views is dangerous, but how does the US election affect your day-to-day job today, and how do you see a potential outcome affecting it post the result?
Well, who needs to watch a Netflix series when you just flick on the news and see more madness going on? I mean, I suppose we take some comfort from the fact we've slagged off lots of old governments, current governments, whatever, quite rightly so. But you can take some comfort that maybe it's not as bad as things appear over there. Well, God, I hope they're not as bad over here anyway. It's a freak show. And I think and hope that, that thing, if America gets a sniffle, the UK catches a cold or whatever that old mantra is. I think there's less of that now, truthfully. They're patently a very important trading partner, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think your question is, will it make a difference to me? What happens? No.
And I think from our point of view, the stability point is the key one. And I think that the timing isn't hugely helpful in that we've had our election and we're now in this slight vacuum until we hit the next budget at the end of October, and then we're going to go straight into the US election. So it feels as though there's still going to be a fair amount of uncertainty or reason for more sitting on hands until you move into next year. So exactly. I think that would be my sort of biggest concern.
So I mean, you're a global corporate. They're watching very closely. It sounds like.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
It'd be interesting to get Rob's perspective, if he's allowed to say, but I think the Fed have done a sterling job in trying to kind of demonstrate their independence and autonomy in a way probably more vocally than they would have done.
Well, I think from my perspective, ultimately we have to remember what we are. We're a small island in the North Sea. We are very, very reliant and dependent on a strong United States, not only as a trading partner, but also from a security perspective. So we do need to maintain as positive a relationship as we possibly can with the US, whoever is in charge. It is at times like this, I'm incredibly grateful that I'm not having to go into the polling booth in November and decide which one I'm going to go for. You'd like to say you know what you're going to get with Trump because he has been the president before, but the reality is a complete lunatic and you have no idea what he's going to do. But from an economic perspective, speaking to American colleagues, American investors, actually he was pretty good for the US economy. Despite the fact he doesn't seem able to manage his own finances particularly well, he did have a positive impact. And then taking Kamala Harris, she's been the vice president for 4 years. I have no idea what she stands for. I have no idea what she's going to do. So reality is, if you pay your money, it takes your chance, because I don't think anyone knows what either of them is going to do. But from our perspective, as I say, we need to maintain a positive relationship with them. And ultimately, it's 4 years. And it takes a lot longer than 4 years to completely dismantle something.
Well, Liz Truss seemed to manage it.
Although, did you see she released a video last week on the second anniversary where she said it would have worked if it hadn't been undermined by the economic establishment, which I think is incredible after everything else.
Rob, we're going to move it. We're going to move it on. And Rob mentioned AI, and I'm really interested. I'm sure the audience is really interested to know. Okay, we talk about technology a lot. We talk about disruption. We all see the gazillions of private equity money being poured into that sector. How is it affecting your worlds? What great things have you seen recently, Alex?
So I sit on a ministerial board at MHCLG around kind of prop tech and innovation, and I chair something called the National Land Data Programme, which sounds very exciting, but it is that kind of granular thing of moving all the astonishingly still many paper records that government has, or the reason when local authorities don't know that they own a particular piece of land because it's on a bit of paper somewhere over there, trying to actually digitise everything in the land reg and actually get it so it's usable and open source and accessible. And there's remarkable innovation happening there that has accelerated through stuff that I thought would genuinely take decades. So, there are great little British startups utilising AI in a way that is going to make it easier for SME developers to identify opportunities and sites, to partner. There's great technology happening around digitising planning and speeding that process up. There's great stuff around actually the operational side of, running buildings. So, you really have seen it's gone very much from concept to actually being utilised. There's a program where they've got pilots and they're all having a really positive effect. So government has actually been able to pick up that even if it doesn't quite understand what it's doing. And I think that the AI is kind of this very amorphous umbrella term for lots of different types of technologies. And but there are really practical applications in prop tech that are really, really interesting.
I would say that AI, everyone's still, if I'm honest with you, slightly freaked out about it. There are lots of things that you can sort of ooh-ah on, YouTube about it. It's phenomenal and it's coming, but I think there's a slight danger that people aren't recognizing how much tech innovation is already available, actually, to help a lot of things we've been talking about this morning. Alex makes the point, identify sites. That's not AI, that's available now. There are lots of tech platforms doing that. I'm not going to bang on about modern methods of construction, but we talked earlier about 1.5 million homes in 5 years. Right now, we physically could not build them. Never mind if there was all the money in the world and there was no planning, you couldn't physically build them. So something's got to give here, and you'd think, and we've sort of set out the stall, haven't we, which the audience will know is the reality, just how bloody difficult every stage of development is. and how we've got this screaming need for housing, beautifully put by Alex, about the chronic crisis, we've got to regard it as infrastructure. You'd think, and if I was a sort of, someone just parachuted in and witnessing everything we've been talking about, I'd think, well, it takes me back for a quick aside. When I was at Savills, I sat down, it's about 5 years ago, with the chairman of Savills. Very unusual. I found myself one-on-one having a chat with him, chatting about some of the challenges we were having as a business. And he sat there very patiently listening, and he said, yeah, Dom, very interesting, thank you. What the fuck are you going to do about it? and quite, so what are we going to do about this housing crisis? Something really radical, well, some things really radical have got to happen now. And part of that is embracing the technology that exists today, never mind the slightly damn-dare futuristic.
There is huge opportunity, isn't there? And I think there is so much out there in terms of sort of AI and tech capability. And I think for us as a business, we see, the sort of the real opportunity initially is in data and how we can use data and how we can harness data from all our assets, especially our shopping centres. But I think that there's the bigger point, and it comes back to money every time, doesn't it? Which is that, these platforms all require upfront investment. And whilst, yes, you can see that there is going to be a sort of long-term efficiency driven from it, and there's long-term benefit, but in the current climate, it's very difficult to make that sort of initial investment and to sort of get yourself moving. So,
and it's where you build that skills gap. So, we're talking about the next generation and the kinds of jobs that they're going to have that don't even exist now. But so one of the AI technologies that's been in use for a number of years for lawyers is kind of the automated lease checking, which takes away the grunt job that a paralegal used to have to slog through for a few years and was really unpleasant, but and very, very dull. So that's been in use in all the major firms for a number of years. The flip side of that, however, is that if you haven't had to slog through that, you don't know the quirks that exist in leases written in 1792 that might be something to look out for. And so you're losing that kind of intangible skill set of just experience of having had to do that process. And so if all of those things are automated, there's that concern about those in-between skills that we're sort of losing in the wider industry. And so I think there's an interesting about how you fill that gap. So if you haven't actually run a building because it's all been completely automated, what you do when that system does break and how you handle it is going to be an interesting challenge.
Yeah, look, I think for me, and at the risk of offending everybody in the room, I think as an industry, I wouldn't necessarily go as far to say that we're Luddites, but we are generally slow adopters of technology. And, taking the point that Dom made, about modern methods of construction, the car industry just didn't decide overnight that they were going to take people off the production line and just automate the process. It was something that they did over a number of years, and it no doubt took huge amounts of investment in order to do that. And in order for us to fully embrace AI, to fully understand the benefits that it's going to offer, it is going to take very considerable sums of money. But then when you look at the opportunities that it will provide, around investment, helping to determine where the appropriate location is to invest, to build. When you look at building, for me, it's a natural extension of BIM. It is going to take it to the next level if it's adopted properly. And then around management, yeah, there is the risk of what happens when it goes down, but it is really the only way we're going to see a step change in how much it costs to operate buildings if we can take people out of those buildings to an extent. I'm not suggesting we have nobody, but using AI, there's got to be a solution for reducing the number of people, and that will have a positive impact on gross to nets, which will then ultimately improve viability.
I agree with you in the sense of I'm sure there's loads of amazing technology out there, but I don't see in the development and construction sector, I don't see a marquee name that all the big boys and girls have signed up to. And why is that? Why hasn't a startup been acquired by an IBM or a Microsoft or somebody that's huge who can just deploy the investment, bring the global capability?
Well, what we haven't had, and I often dream about this, is someone doing an Elon Musk with what he did with Tesla. He decided, and of course he could afford to do it, and he was bloody minded enough as well. So he had the money and the sort of crazy
characteristic.
Right, clean sheet of paper. How do I create a mass-produced electric car And what he didn't do was buy an existing business with all its sort of dyed-in-the-wool habits. It was literally clean sheet of paper, and look what he did with that. The opportunity to do that, pick up on your point, is someone just to say, right, this system is so bust, and Andrew was saying we're not Luddites quite, but I mean, I think quite a few of us are dinosaurs, if we're not Luddites, plodding around, very committed to doing things the old way, and coming back to that point about downing tools and maybe doing nothing, we're thinking the sun's going to come out eventually, and we'll come out and just do everything the way we used to. I think most people would buy the notion that ain't right. So a moment in time now for a Elon Musk or a Sir James Dyson to say, come on, guys, we can do this, and just bring that clean sheet of paper approach to it, embracing all that technology, AI and all. It's there, and in fact, we need it now.
I think that have been some interesting companies that have had a go, and you're right, the MMC is kind of the best example, but for me, Mark Farmer was absolutely right with modernise or die 8 years ago, and the industry still hasn't banged heads together. But Andrew alluded to the automotive sector. If you look at any other major sector, they'll pool R&D to do this, and they'll share it, and they'll do that shared learning. We as a sector are terrible at that. We're so obsessive over IP and protectionism and not sharing. You can work. I've worked on JVs where we don't share pricing with the other side, which is bonkers. And so you can't blitz through that. And then actually, however good the technology of your MMC system, if you take it to an investment committee to try and get an underwrite, and you have to explain that, oh, by the way, but if there's any problems or it goes wrong, we have to demolish the entire thing and start again with another system, because there's no standardization of components. So we can't. The sector hasn't actually come as the sector. There's no way of adopting it or scaling it. It's all entirely bespoke. That is nonsense. And all the MMC sector needs to do is come together, share a bit of IP, agree some standardization, and that would allow the much more conservative elements of the industry who have made lots of money doing the same thing over and over again to adopt a bit of innovation, to go with an underwrite on something that is a new way of doing it and take that risk. But so there is a bit of responsibility on both sides there. Investors can want to invest in innovation, but you have to be able to kind of do it at a risk premium that is manageable. And actually, the innovators need to be able to take a call on how much IP they want to own versus how much collaboration they can get to scale.
I'd go further as well, because I think if you're going to innovate, which I agree, I think is absolutely essential, you have to persuade your end customer that the product they're going to buy has longevity. And of course, a home has far longer lifespan than a car. But when you buy an innovative product from Tesla, it comes with the backup of Tesla's maintenance and their garages. And if something goes wrong, you drive in, it's got the big Tesla over the front, and it will be sorted. When you buy a home, you don't have that. You maybe get a year, and then you have to phone Joe Blogg's plumber, who comes and sucks through his teeth and says, "Oh, I've never seen one like this before." So ultimately, we can be as innovative as we want at the front end, but we have to be able to give confidence to the consumer that what they're buying is going to have that longevity.
Exactly. And actually, I won't name the provider, but if anybody went around one of the early MMC sort of production sites and the houses, and I said, how are you doing the kitchens and the bathrooms? No, we're hot gluing them on. And I was like, well, this is a sales product. What's the first thing that most people do, regardless of how new the kitchen is? And most homeowners will change that in the first 2 years that they've acquired. I said, so how do these come off? And they went, I don't know. We have no idea. I don't know if they can. And I said, well, that's a fundamental lack of having looked at or understanding your end user of this product, which was unsurprising they then couldn't get it off the ground.
Right, we are 10 minutes out from wrapping up, so I still have a few questions, but I really, really would love some questions from you. Andrew has a question at the front here, Laura. I'm sorry I haven't asked sooner, but I'm just been too fascinated with the flow.
A couple of observations, actually. We set up, as many of you know, 5 years ago, Rise Homes. We've done 2,000 apartments in the last 4 years. Andrew values them too, one of his teams in CBRE. Been really successful, providing quality, affordable rental stock across the North and Midlands. Big regeneration projects, Moss Side, where we won an award for the best regeneration project outside of London. Moss Side, where all the riots were. We've just finished Stockport. We dropped the whole of Stockport town centre, put 2,000 apartments there, rebuilt the bus station, which was a bus station up in Manchester as well. We've done 7 projects, all more or less finished. The last one in Leeds will be finished in a few weeks. Fully let, which has been great. We're backed by the British Strategic Investment Fund, which is local authority pension funds. I've got great contact with...
What's the question, Andrew?
It's a good sales pitch so far. One I have heard before as well.
The issue is local authorities are bust. Actually sourcing patient capital is really difficult at the moment. And what I think we need is a lot more grant coming through. Parts of our developments have been funded by grant, and accessing that is a big plus, actually, because and that's in the hands of the government, really. I mean, I'm in Australia next month, speaking in Sydney to a big conference there, and Singapore, trying to raise money over there. Are you going as well?
Andrew, Laura wants a mic back. I'm really sorry, because there's another question.
I can give you really quickly. So in the budget, fiscal devolution to local authorities is something they have trailed a lot, and you will see more of. And particularly in like London boroughs are very keen on that. You know, the Labour mandate for genuine fiscal devolution to authorities and more funding and more power. So there's no new money, but you might look to see more efficient ways of accessing existing monies than through the current pools and the current procurement processes.
Brilliant. Thank you. Anne?
Not directing this question at anyone in particular, but interested me, none of the panel have talked about affordability. Andrew, you've talked about capital, private capital. Alex, you touched on quality build-to-rent for people who are unable to buy. Dom, you've all talked about the sort of development process. Dominic, you referred to it requiring oiling at every stage. If somehow you can manage to pull all this together, are we still going to be able to deliver affordable products? And if they're not affordable, how does the end user manage to buy them? And I think actually affordability has been a huge problem in the residential market for a long time. And interestingly, you haven't mentioned it.
I think it's because it's so pervasive, as you say, that we're all kind of assuming that's just there all the time. The House of Lords admit that the government's own definition of affordability is unworkable and unhelpful. So that's the point. I think the huge appetite that you're seeing for institutional investors in key worker or essential worker housing, depending on how you define it. So that's not social rent, but it's not kind of, it's that squeezed middle point there is something that a lot of LGPS are really, really keen on. And it's about getting the BTR quality without necessarily the premium that's associated with the first iteration of BTR. And I think, those of us who are around that early sector, we didn't do ourselves a favour by really trying to replicate that very high-end US model because it gave the perception to a lot of local authorities and policymakers that it was only at that level. And actually there is a place for a luxury model, but actually the big chunk, 70% of the build to rent that you'll look at in the US will be mid-rise, suburban homes, family, and absolutely in that small A affordable market. And that is what I think the potential for the sector is absolutely huge to do. We need to do a better job of telling that story. The reason I push for kind of that mixed tenure model is that should, by its very nature, allow a greater breadth of affordable rents and sales prices in there, because we've got to be able to offer a mix to allow for people's incomes. And there's an interesting pressure when you realise how many people are paying upwards of 50% of their income on housing costs. And people assume it's just London. It's not, and much, much more. So I think there is a big thing to do there, but the mixed tenure model for me is a big way of unlocking that.
And I think as long as supply is constrained, that enormous gap between the affordable with a capital A and the private will only be exacerbated, because we are trying, the viability point is always there. So until we can ease up the supply and we can deliver more, then that's the only way I see that we can start to extend the sort of the price point of the private end of the model.
So.
Morning. Given the challenges and delays that the panel are describing for delivering sort of scalable solutions to the housing market, what importance do they give to the private rental sector, bearing in mind we're seeing a lot of landlords trying to get out and exit due to recent policy changes?
I think it still has a fundamental part to play, and one of the concerns that I've got personally are some of the changes that we'd like to see in the budget around CGT. inheritance tax. Ultimately, it's probably going to force more buy-to-let investors out of the sector. And the net result of that is, unless those people are going to buy, which I think a very small proportion may, they're going to have to rent something else, which then just goes to the point Anne was making, which is just going to put further pressure on affordability. So I think actually the government needs to have an acceptance that buy-to-let has a role to play, and that, yes, they should taper it down over a period of time, but it's not something that you can immediately stop and that you want to stop, actually, because you're just going to create a massive issue around, there not being enough supply and enough homes for these people to go to. We talk about, there's a lot of talk about the scale of the build-to-rent industry, how many build-to-rent homes there are. Reality, out of a total number of households of living in the PRS of 5.4 million, there is only 100,000 operational build-to-rent homes. It's tiny. It's less than 2%. So it is the long-term solution, but in the interim, we do need a stable buy-to-let sector until that transition point is reached.
Exactly, and I'm sure you're familiar with the NRLA, the National Residential Landlord Association. So the chief exec, Ben Beadle, is a kind of champion and campaigner for the importance of the good landlords, and they have done reams of research to kind of acknowledge, yes, the bad landlords, the stereotypes and exist for a reason, but actually they've published research, things like the enforcement gap. It's a great report that points out that government has this tendency to kind of create lots of new regulation when actually plenty of it exists already, but most local authorities don't enforce the regs that they've already got the powers to use. They're underfunded, and so actually they're not tackling things. They've got the option to tackle bad landlords and deal with it, and they're not using it. So I think it's very, very important we recognise that the good private landlords and that buy-to-let sector should be able to sit alongside the institutional rental sector as we grow it, and it's not about replacing one with the other. We absolutely have to have both.
We have space in the middle.
It's coming that way.
Pass the mic.
Hi there. Given the political backdrop that we talk about and competing for attention with defence, sort of healthcare, social welfare, all of those things, it strikes me that often we're dealing with the symptoms of problems in those sectors, and that at the root of it, housing of all tenures is part of the solution. What more as a sector do we need to be doing? What's the call to action in this room to create those arguments, to win those arguments, to change the political landscape as we move forward?
I think that's there's a big chunk of work that the LNG and the Health Foundation have been doing, which you can sign up to their kind of mailing list, around recognising that a lot of the NHS doctors are dealing with the outcomes of poor housing, and we're kind of asking, where can we intervene in this and explain that this is causing us a huge issue. And so there is a growing awareness of that kind of housing ecosystem that Dominic alluded to earlier. Does feed into every aspect of I was at LREF yesterday, and the councillor from Waltham Forest, who's the head of housing for London councils, pointed out that in every classroom in their borough there is at least one child who is in temporary accommodation. In every classroom there is at least one child who probably doesn't have a bed and is sharing. So that the volume of it, that's the 320,000 children in the UK who are not in safe and secure accommodation. It is a national scandal and a crisis, so it does have all these ripple effects into the cost that we're spending everywhere else. I think it does come back to Whitehall's tendency to see everything in very tight silos, and actually trying to point out to them the reason I bang on about housing as infrastructure is if you can get them to understand that, you can then get them to understand, and it relates to health and education and everything else. I'd love for it to be a straight line message, but I think it's just something that we as a sector have to do more of.
It's a really simple question, and we all know the simple answer is, Penny alluded to it, we just got to build more homes far quicker and better, and we can.
And we can if we unlock the viability. But we need that political backdrop, don't we, to overcome that?
Last question, please. I'm sorry if we...
Thanks. Hi, Lizzie Pettit from Goodstone Living. Really great discussion. Thank you very much, guys. My question is, do you think this is a uniquely British problem? I love your idea, Alex, about housing being infrastructure and needing to focus on that. Do you think other countries in Europe in particular do this better? I'm thinking about, Building Safety Act, which you mentioned, Penny, as being a huge issue that the sector is facing. In Germany, you couldn't put ACM into a building for the last 20 years. They just were blown away by Grenfell saying, how was that building ever allowed to be built? How was it ever allowed to continue to be in the state it was in? Similarly with, standardizing how we build our homes. You go to Germany, every window is the same, every, consultant that comes in knows how to fix the buildings. My question is it a uniquely British problem? And if so, why?
I can
Go, you
say,
go.
I mean, we are, as a business, headquartered in Paris. We operate all around the world, but have a lot of assets in Europe. And the answer is no, this isn't a unique problem to the UK. I mean, I think the challenge that we're all facing, which is that sort of uncertainty of regulation and the sort of, I suppose, it's all rooted in the political cycles, and that is consistent across all of Europe. I would say working for a global business, my biggest challenge is that our main board have to get their heads around the regulatory sort of ecosystem in every single country. So trying to explain to a French person how our planning system works, you get an awful lot of eye rolls and it all just becomes too difficult. But
you would have got that anyway.
I would, yes, I've learnt that. But at the same time, if they were to explain to me how to do something in France, it's exactly the same. So I think we all have the same issues. I suppose we now work in a far more globalised world, and communicating the sort of intricacies and the nuances of different countries' regulatory systems is always going to be a challenge.
I have to do a bit of homework. I'm advising a Dutch bank who are lending into the PBSA, BTR and co-living space at the development end of it, not the long-term capital. And along with a colleague, I had to present to their board in The Hague last year. And they said, can you please relate, we want to understand more about the UK market. Can you relate it to the European market? And wherever you can, relate it to the Netherlands market. So it made me go online. And it was quite terrifying when one looked at our housing output compared to our European partners, just how appalling we are. So another pub ball fact for you, only Finland builds fewer housing per capita in Europe than us.
But I just say, and the fact you mentioned Finland is interesting. So we've talked a lot about regulation, and we are operating in an increasingly regulated environment. Building Safety Act, Renters Reform Bill. But the one thing that we do not have, and that is something that we share with Finland, and we're the only two areas in Europe, apart from Scotland in the UK, is we don't have rent control. And that is a real boost. If for international investors looking at investing into Europe, the fact that we do not have rent control in I say the UK, excluding Scotland, is a really good thing. So I think we have to consider it through that lens as well. And also it's the transition that we're going through. Yeah. We have been, for the past 70 years, a nation where you have been encouraged to be a homeowner. You have been encouraged to buy your home. And we're now at that transition point where actually some people may never buy their own home. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. And we're just getting to that point where we just need to provide the housing, whereas in Germany, the vast majority of the population rent, and they've always rented. Mm-hmm. So it is different, I think.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends, I have to jump in. It's we're over time. I'm really conscious that you're all incredibly busy. So I will call the time. I want to thank the panel. Brilliant discussion. Rob, final words from yourself.
Well, so I wasn't prepared for that. Just to say, I think one of the messages that I've been hearing is a worry about talking ourselves down. And I think what the bank is trying to say at the moment is things are definitely improving, and our forecast is for growth to pick up. It's been brilliant that despite all the problems we've had, unemployment has stayed really low relative to previous recessions, and it isn't likely to go up very much. So that's one very heartening fact, and we are hoping that interest rates will continue to fall, and that will help this sector. So I'm hoping that in a year's time, when we do this again, things will feel quite a lot more positive, because the cuts in interest rates will have started to translate to better conditions for you all, and that's what I'm hoping to happen. So when we do it, you'll be able to shout at me if it isn't what's happening.
Which is brilliant. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Please mingle. Please have coffees downstairs. I can't thank you enough for coming. And I hand over to Dom, who's going to...